for having me.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. I think there's a few people outside, but don't trickle in. Thank you for being here and welcome to the second installment of Beyond Field Social Issues in Sport. Hopefully you can all hear us and see us. If you can't hear us, just kind of raise your hands and we'll try and speak louder. But essentially the program is to talk about some of the political, social, and economic issues that we deal with in sport. This is our second year of programming. First, we'd like to thank the Student Union Board of Governors and Center for Students with Disabilities, MEAC School of Education, and Department of Sport Management for all of their help in this process. Their financial support, advertising, marketing, obviously bringing a lot of students here too. We're very thankful for that. So now we'll get started. Today our guest is Mary McVeigh from Soccer Without Borders. Mary is the co-founder and first executive director of Soccer Without Borders. She has worked to build the SWB Nicaragua program while designing and implementing structure to support and sustain the organization as a whole. In 2012, Mary was honored by the National Soccer Coaches Association of America's Jerry Yeagley Award for personal service and her work with Soccer Without Borders. And then instead of reading about Soccer Without Borders, we're just going to show a little video just to give you an idea of what they do and what Mary does.
Soccer Without Borders is using soccer as a platform to build community and healthy lifestyle.
Soccer is the central activity, and that's complemented by educational support, which includes academic and language development, team building, civic engagement, and cultural exchange. Limited English speakers graduate at a rate of 58%. Soccer Without Borders programs have an average graduation rate of 95%.
When newcomers first arrive, they feel a sense of isolation. They don't have friends that they came with. They may not be able to speak a common language with others. Right away, when you come into the team context, you really start to feel a sense of community and a sense of family.
I never realized that soccer was actually a language and that I could speak it. Because when I got here, some players would speak Spanish, but not all of them. But I already have a connection with them because we love soccer.
In addition to having that community of peers that's supportive, having that kind of mentor relationship between the coach and the player is vitally important for them. All young people need that kind of support, that kind of love, and that kind of guidance. And I think it's especially true when you're trying to navigate a new culture and a new language.
You meet a lot of kids that they come in and they're more reserved, and then you start to see them fall in love with their teammates and with the program, and it's a place where they want to be, and they start to be themselves and be kids. I'm most proud of the girls in our programs that are able to achieve that, because I think the barriers for them are often stacked up that much higher.
In Syria, the girls never play soccer because it's bad. The girl in Syria shy, not can do anything, work in the home every time. I say, why that? Because the girl can do everything, right?
So it's not really about looking at developing better soccer players. It's kind of looking at what is a range of activities that we can reasonably do that really supports the development of somebody to grow both as an athlete, but also as a student, as a teammate, as a member of the community, and really supports them to take the next step in their life.
I feel like really separated from you all, just to acknowledge that. Sorry, this is so. We tried to put the chairs like everywhere we could.
Yeah.
We'll sit up straight.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Mary. We're very happy to have you here. The first question that we usually ask our guests is how you became interested in this, specifically sport for development, Soccer Without Borders, and how did those interests kind of build the organization that you are a part of now?
Big question. So I grew up playing soccer. I was really fortunate to play soccer in a number of different contexts, from youth soccer when I was 4 with my older brother wearing pink pants and running the wrong direction, to when I was young, my family moved to Germany, and there I played soccer on a boys team for 2 years while going to public school. And like a lot of the kids in our programs, not speaking the language, not having any friends at first, and kind of using soccer as a way to navigate that. Had the chance to come back and playing club soccer in high school and college soccer and professionally in the U.S. and then professionally in Europe. So all these different contexts that I got to play in, but it was never really about just trophies or championships for me. It was like, these were my best friends. These were mentors that I had made. This is my way of connecting with the community. And so when I got to graduate school, I was coaching at Lehigh University, coaching the team there and studying sociology of sport. I know many of you are in sport management program, and there was a sport for development class maybe at UConn also. So I was sort of studying this concept of how can sport shape society and culture, and when does sport sort of reflect society and when can it shape it, and how can you influence that? So that's where I met Ben, the founder. He was a Lehigh men's soccer player and kind of had this idea to create an organization that explored just that. So I convinced him to let me be a part of it, and traveled to Nicaragua, just kind of got on a plane, having read all these books that are like, you can go and you can bring equipment and train people and then leave and you've done your part. And that was, I got on the plane expecting to do that. And that was 11 years ago, and I am still doing it because that's actually not true. You can't just show up for a couple of months and expect to make real social change. So for me, that first trip was really my aha moment, I guess. I shared this story this morning with Charlie, but when I was there, I was wrapping up the day. It was like kind of late. I was there with one of my Nicaraguan coach friends who was this 17-year-old guy named Chepe. And I'm walking home with a former teammate of mine and peer as a coach. And we're walking home, and the three of us come upon this 3 versus 3 soccer game, all men, by light of like a street lamp at 9 o'clock at night. So we asked Chepe to ask these guys, can we play it? And the guys just started bursting out laughing at him. They're like, you're gonna play us with these 2 women. Like, that is not gonna happen. But they let us play, and we ended up winning like 9 games in a row. And just watching these guys go through this period of being like, laughing at us, and then being super angry at each other and at themselves, and then blaming, and then suddenly it was just like, whatever, if you can play, you can play. And it was awesome. And that was my sort of first, this is something that can influence social change. This is something that 32 years of soccer can actually help me do. And so that was kind of how it turned into something more than just that one trip for me.
Fascinating. I mean, it was also reflected in the video that we just showed, but sort of that idea that like soccer is a language, and I find that really interesting. And is that something that's across all sports in your opinion, or is it just soccer?
I think a lot of sports have some really unique ways that people can connect to them, that people can express themselves. Individual sports versus team sports. I think globally, you'd be hard pressed to find a more universal language than soccer. And I think that in part is because it's low cost, it's accessible, it's a lot of places you travel, people say it's in their blood. It's everywhere. So I think there is a universality in a lot of sports, and a lot of sports have some really amazing lessons that can be taught through them. But I think soccer is more than a sport. I think it's a language, it's a passion, it's a lifestyle. And a lot of our kids would tell you that, and I think that can really be channeled into something influential.
And so how do you do that channeling, right? Because we saw that it's not just soccer. You're not just trying to make better athletes, but you're trying to connect with these individuals and something more. So what is that, and then how do you do that? What does it look like in practice?
Yeah, so the program is year-round, and it's holistic. It's after school, so we use soccer practices and games as kind of the central activity. We really believe that the team is where the change happens. So you have teammates that know you, that you care about. You have a coach that is showing up for you every day that you can go to. So we really focus on that team. But then also our programs are targeting a specific population with hopefully some specific needs that we can provide wraparound services for. So here in the US, you saw we work with newcomer, refugee, asylum seeker, immigrant youth, many of whom are learning English. So one of the primary wraparound services we try to provide is English language development. And a lot of those wraparound services are really research driven. You know, all of the research says that in order to be successful in America, immigrants need to build their social capital and learn English. So what better way than a team that also provides that? So we try to be really intentional about what those services are and adapt them to different contexts. You know, we have programs internationally and in the US and in different US cities. And each city is different. Cities have different resources. In Baltimore, there's 45 minutes a day max of English language development, versus in California, some of our kids are at a school that all day is English language development. They're trained for that. So, you know, we want to plug, we don't want to duplicate, we want to add value where we can. I think Ben says it, what is a range of activities we can reasonably do? I think oftentimes that means reining ourselves in versus trying to do more, because it's, when you're working with kids that have a whole range of needs, health needs, they need to understand about nutrition, or they want to apply to college, like all these things, you can very quickly find yourself doing too much, which we talked about today in our conversation. So we try to, what can we do well? What are the things we can do well? And how can we provide those over time? I think that's sort of the last differentiator for us, is we try to work with kids from middle school all the way through the end of high school. And that long-term, holistic, year-round, we want to be a second family to our kids. And that sometimes means serving fewer kids for a longer period of time.
How do you get adjusted into the cities? You spoke about how they're all kind of different, they all have different resources. Can you give us kind of a timeline on what it usually takes, or how you started in particular cities and how they might be different?
Sure. So each of the cities that we're in started with an invitation by somebody who was from there, who saw a need there, and asked us if we could try to come add value, collaborate, bring equipment, coaching, whatever the need is that they saw, bring the program model. So I think that's really important to make sure that it's a community that wants what you're bringing. But I also think once you have a model that's worked in places, you know, you can also be a little more intentional about sort of seeing, well, where could this work? What are those factors? So we are looking at opening a 7th program next year in a new city that will be led by somebody from that city who we've already identified. And, you know, it's an exciting time to be able to see what that looks like now, when the last program we opened was Boston in 2012. So in the last 5 years, what have we learned? What have we solidified? And how does that change our on-ramp process? Hopefully it'll be a lot quicker to get it up and running.
Can you just elaborate on why it's important to be invited, and then also have individuals from the community engaged in and operating sort of like a program for the community?
Sure. So I think people oftentimes they want to be the champions of their own community. We all do. We all want to be in charge of our own needs and what we want. You know, autonomous in what you're doing with your future. And communities are like that. If you kind of see a community as a person, you know, that's your main champion. Things that people want to see get done. So I think it's really important, if you are an outsider, to be open about what you're trying to do and really build momentum, you know, build a community of people that all want the same thing. I think we're going to talk about this a little bit. I don't think being an outsider means you can't do something. I think it's more, how do we align what the goals are, and if we both genuinely want the same thing, great, let's work together to get it.
And so let's just dive right into
Okay,
that then.
let's do
So,
it. Yes.
so
There's a question order.
So you have written an article about this before. It's called "Converting Privilege into Positive Action and Social Change." Sorry, is that the name of the article? No, it's
the helicopter.
Helicopter. My apologies. So could you just explain what
Sure.
that is?
So I wrote this piece after one of my early trips to Nicaragua. It was called Seeing the Helicopter in the Room. And it was after this experience I had where I was down there and we had been invited to do a coaching clinic by a member of the Peace Corps on this volcano island. So it was literally in Nicaragua, there's a huge lake, and in the middle of the lake there is a volcano island that has a dormant and an active volcano. And the week before we were supposed to go, the volcano started smoking and was about to erupt. And so I'm kind of asking around, should we be worried about this? Should we be not going to the volcano island? Does the ferry still run if it erupts? Like, what's gonna happen? And my Nicaraguan counterpart goes, Mary, don't worry, if the volcano erupts, a helicopter will come pick you up and I will be standing on the side waving goodbye. And, she was joking, but it was, I had worked so hard to try to make this feel like an equal relationship. And, I was staying in homestays, eating locally, trying to do everything to be like, I genuinely want to be here and understand what it's like to be from this community. And I genuinely wanted that, but it's paradoxical, right? Like, I picked up my passport, I packed hundreds of pounds of soccer equipment, and I got on an expensive plane to fly there. So, like, by nature, we are not in the same situation. And I think I came to understand that as the helicopter in the room, and that does not go away, but how you think about it and how you approach it and how you genuinely seek to collaborate with people when some resources are being imported, some resources are already local. Let's be transparent about that, and can you still build trust when there's a helicopter in the room? And 10 years later, that Nicaragua program is still running. We have 2 Nicaraguan leaders who are at the helm, and some of the resources are still coming from the outside, but many of them are now being generated. About 40% of the program is done through local activities that are led by the local staff, so we're getting there. And I just think we've been really, really transparent and honest about that, and found that there was community members, because we were invited, that genuinely wanted the same thing, and so we could sort of walk alongside each other instead of it feeling like it was that power dynamic was going to derail the whole thing.
So the articles alluded to a lot of authentic collaboration, kind of what that looks like, what that means. We all come from places of privilege in different ways. And so you spoke to kind of having locals lead some of the groups or be a strong part of the organization, but are there any other components to Soccer Without Borders that make the authentic collaboration possible and make her sound part of it?
It's a great question. I think listening is kind of the biggest. One of our core values is to be process oriented, and a part of the process is really making a space for all stakeholders, including the kids, including parents and partners, to genuinely have a voice in what the direction is. And I think one thing that I've learned is that you really have to schedule that space. You can't assume that people are gonna come tell you, well, I'm always available, so like someone will tell me if it's not going well or if they have an idea. No, you need to seek out their ideas and genuinely listen and consider them and kind of talk through, okay, well, what about this and what about this, and try to build something together. And I think that the way that we build it in is to make sure that each of those stakeholders, particularly the kids that we're working with, have a voice in what we're doing through feedback loops. We require one-on-one meetings with coaches like twice a season, which doesn't sound like much, but if you're working with dozens of kids, and as a coach you need to schedule what's potentially an hour of time twice a season, it's a big commitment, and that's just the formal time, not hey coach, can I talk to you after practice? So we're really trying to build it into the schedule and make sure that everyone's voice can be heard. That doesn't mean you always go with what's said, but it means everybody's bought into the process.
And so then in another article, you talked about the charity paradox, why investing in all young people is not a handout. Could you just unpack what the charity paradox is to start, and then we'll go from there?
I wrote this article after the skeleton tax plan was released earlier this year. And it had zeroed out like every after-school program, every service program, pretty much every domestic program that nonprofits rely on got zeroed out. And it was just a proposal, it hasn't happened yet. But some of the comments that came with it were around, well, these programs, they're a handout. They're creating dependency. If you give this to kids or give this to adults, they're never gonna learn to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And it just got me thinking, actually, about higher ed. I went to a liberal arts school in New Hampshire, and pretty much every building has the name of a person on it. And I was just thinking about that, and I'm like, each of those buildings is a massive charitable contribution that was made for my education. So I did a little research into it, and it turned out that each student costs taxpayers $120,000 to graduate. Even if you are a full-pay student, the amount that it costs to teach a student at my alma mater versus what tuition they're paid, that's all charity that makes up the difference. And it amounts to $120,000 a student. And that's just at the 8 schools in the conference that I was a part of. 27% of that cost of educating the students from those 8 schools is what it would cost to fund the entire 21st Century Grant, all of AmeriCorps, and all of these social programs that they were going to eliminate. We were spending 4 times as much just on students from 8 schools as a country than we are on millions of kids through these. It's mind-blowing that we have a narrative that we can give tax breaks to rich institutions, but it's a handout when it's a program that's providing kids with a place to go after school for 3 hours. That just doesn't make sense. And I'm not here to argue about the validity of higher ed charitable deductions, but more just the narrative that the other is just not true. Our kids are some of the most resilient, high potential people I've ever met. And if you talk about somebody who's earned the right to have 3 hours of free programming after school, it's like they've survived war in some cases. Some of them, it's like I don't even deserve to be none of the accomplishments I've done could possibly match that. They've overcome so much, and if that means that we're spending $800 a year to be able to provide that service so they can reach their potential and learn English, then to me that's the best investment we could make. So that was really the crux of the article in framing it. And then it was just asking the question, why don't we think that way? Like how does this narrative exist in our society? And I really struggled with that and kind of came to the conclusion that it's a lack of empathy. Like we have this tendency to think everywhere that I am, I've earned, and everywhere that everyone else is, they've probably earned too. And that's the very definition of empathy, is to be able to say, I can picture myself in your shoes, and what then? I think there is a tremendous breakdown of empathy in our country right now in deciding where resources go, and we want to advocate for people that maybe don't have the means to write articles on Medium or wherever it was. So that was kind of where it came about. I get fired up about it. So
Yeah, no, it was a fantastic article. Definitely, I think especially in the climate that we're in today, I've seen a lot of people speak on kind of changing the language to having a lack of empathy and a lack of understanding. That's so important. And keeping our own personal view of things and being able to at least try and understand others, whether it's learning about the people in Soccer Without Borders or Husky Sport or whatever community we're serving. I think that's really important. Do you want to?
Sure, yeah, we can get some time to open it up. We would like to open it up now to you all, because I know there's some people here who are work directly with Husky Sport, others that are currently volunteering in a class, but also others who are just generally interested in it. So we'd like to give you guys the opportunity to ask some questions if you all have any.
So in our one class, we talked about going to places and making a difference and helping.
Yeah.
What's your do you believe that you're going in to help, or what's your mindset when you're going to these places and start up an organization?
I love that question. So one thing that we ask our volunteers and people that go abroad with us to read is an article called "How Can I Help?" Because in a lot of ways, that's what we're taught, right? We go and we help and we try to fix it, and then we leave and we may never see them again. I really see it as mutual. I think I've gained much more than I've given in most places I've traveled. And I think most people that have traveled with us would feel the same way. And it's well, why did we come to that conclusion after? Why not send that message before? This is an exchange. This is two people or two groups of people who can both learn from each other. Let's call that. And one of them maybe has the means to take the plane ride to go see the other, but that does not inherently make them better or make them the helper. And I think that's a narrative I would love to see shift, and it's something that usually people come back thinking, I really gained as much as I gave, and how amazing if we could do that equally and really feel like it was beneficial to both sides, and we both are now better connected with one another and, richer for it. It's a great question. Happy to share the article if you want.
Where do you get the equipment to sponsor all of these kits? Do you guys go and buy it, or do you have someone donate it?
We get a lot of equipment donations. It's kind of amazing how much equipment is sitting around in people's garages and is just turned over in this country. So we actually had too much. We now have a thing on our website that says, please do not send us equipment unless we ask, because we had to almost buy a storage unit to store it all. There was so much coming in. And I think that's a tribute to people's generosity, but it's also, at least in soccer, it's kind of becoming a trend now that people wear a uniform for 6 months and then they get a new one, and it's a challenge that in some ways we benefited from. We almost never pay for equipment, so that's been great for us. But I also think there's ways in which we could maybe stop it at the source. Also, why is there this much unused equipment in our country?
Just in the back first, and then.
You mentioned how in Boston you created a program there, and now next year you're creating another one. Where do you see 10, 20 years from now the growth of the program, but also the direction that you guys want to go with it?
Great question. So we've been doing a lot of research about kind of what is the right size for an organization. The bigger you get, the more bureaucracy there is, and you end up kind of at a farther distance from the community program that you started with. When we started, it was me on the field coaching, and now I sit in an office most of the day, and I can only imagine if we had 50 programs what that would mean. And so we've kind of come to a 6 to 10 program goal for the US, where you can have a national footprint and kind of have an accessible program in each region, but then use those as kind of innovation hubs where we can try to see what we're learning and share that out with other organizations, maybe via Boys and Girls Clubs or YMCAs or International Rescue Committee or schools. So I think that's a next iteration for us. If you think about Starbucks, I'll just use that as an example since I was there today. If you think about Starbucks, they have their stores, and then they also have the version that you have in your bookstore, where it's a smaller version, and then they also have their drinks in a gas station. So what is the equivalent of that in terms of programs? Can you have your full program, and then can you have maybe your curriculum over here, or a smaller version of your program in another place. So we're looking at all those different methods of scale, I guess. But we think that having enough programs to learn from that we run ourselves that we can really use to make sure that we continue to learn. We've learned so much from the 6 programs we have, and now we're hoping to learn what it looks like to start up another program from scratch if we can really accelerate that process. But I think once we get to 8 to 10, we're going to be kind of at that tipping point where if we went bigger, we'd just become a massive bureaucracy, and we want to try to avoid that. So that's the plan. Come back in 10 years and see if you've held me to it.
I was just wondering, when you go somewhere else or a different country, and obviously you're like, you come in, like you said, the helicopter in the room.
Yeah.
There's definitely like you're coming all the way over here and all these resources. Do you think that maybe your influence and maybe you're helping to kind of like almost like promoting your lifestyle over staying where they are and kind of like doing things that are challenging their communities then? And like how do you counteract that where maybe most of the students like they go through this program and they're thinking they're like, I want to go to the United States, and because from where they come from, it seems as though like you're coming with resources and I want that. Instead of saying I want to stay in Nicaragua and I want to help this community up front.
Yeah. It seems like there's kind of 2 parts to the question. So one, in terms of the content and promoting what could be perceived as American values, and then 2, the piece about people coming. So to the first point, I think that's where making sure that there's leadership that's local is incredibly important. I would say one of, we do a lot of work with girls. I think it is equality, gender equality is named at the highest level at the UN as a sustainable development goal. So I don't feel like we are imposing American values on a group to be advocating for equality in terms of gender equality, because that's sort of above our level at the human rights level. That's where that's being advocated for. But in terms of specifics, I think sex ed is one area that we've had a lot of discussion with local communities. How do you talk about this? Can you talk about contraception? Or, Nicaragua is a very Catholic country, and you really have to be conscious of deferring to people that know best, that know their community best, and know what's appropriate. So we try to, I guess, recognize which topics are sort of at a human rights level that we feel like if there's not gender equality there and it's being reflected in soccer, but it's also in society, is that an American value, or is that just the right thing that we should be doing whatever we can to promote gender equality? So we do look to things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals to kind of give guidance around that. But specific topics, specific methods, definitely have to defer to conversations with local community members. And to your second point about sort of wanting to come here, I think that narrative is a little bit overblown. People want to feel at home. Like people are proud of their homes. Even there's a resource difference. Everybody that I've met is so proud to be where they're from, and they want the best for their community. And if we can help do that, then they want to work with us. So I think that's rare. I think it's often somebody who, for whatever reason, may not have strong connections to their community, if they've lost their family, or if they've been forced to leave their home. I think that's different, or if it's incredibly violent. So I think we are faced with a big displacement and migration challenge globally, not because everybody's racing to get where there's resources, but because they're forced to leave their home. And I think that was one thing that surprised me when I first went places, because I had heard that narrative too, and I just haven't seen it.
So that authentic collaboration, it sounds like very much focused on relationship building.
Yeah.
It seems right. However, I just wanted to think about that you and Ben have had that unique opportunity of really building this from the ground up, right? Have you ever had the opportunity of going into another organization, or maybe an NGO that has sort of a institutional history there, where they're not operating with authentic collaboration, and they're just sort of kind of like, we're going into this meeting, we're going to do what we want, and this is how it's going to be done. Have you ever had that opportunity to work with them and sort of maybe like push for change, or even maybe help assisting in changing the way that they go about working with their communities?
I think the biggest incidence of this, and I hesitate to say this, we have had some instances with embassies that are very much like that, where it's about promoting our own brand as an embassy, versus really like, what does the community need? It's more like, we need to do a program that's about X, so we're going to do it, and we're going to take pictures of it. And that's very dependent on the person involved. I think they have a massive challenge of turnover, where diplomats turn over every 2 years. So that is not to say that is always the case, but I think the times that I've experienced it have been with sort of last minute programs that were probably imposed on an embassy staff member, like, you need to go do this, and they do it, and it's, not genuinely what the community needed or wanted, and a lot of money is spent on t-shirts, and it's not ultimately valuable. So I think some could even say that about us in our early years in some of our programs. I think as long as you're learning, it's, that's all you can ask for. I would hate to say that about an organization that, who knows what they learned from it. But I will say I've had that experience with these like sort of short-term, take a lot of pictures, that's almost never genuinely about authentic collaboration. I think most of it happens away from cameras. I would say that's probably the best programs, or probably the ones you haven't really heard of.
And then so just like continuing along those lines is the majority of the students who come through the sport management program, I don't know how much of the NGO side is on their radar.
Yep.
A lot of them want to go into like the for-profit businesses, so like working for the NFL and NHL, whatever it might be. Is it possible to take something like authentic collaboration into those settings and implement them, and could you provide like sort of what that would look like?
Okay. Well, I think this is a really exciting time to be going into those, and I hope that it's not viewed as this dichotomy of either I go into work for social good or I go into Major League Baseball or whatever it is. I think there's going to be a coming together. I hope that it's led by you all, where giving back or reducing costs or looking at barriers is actually embedded into our sport program models. Soccer is actually starting to do this. There's an initiative called Common Goal that is getting players signed up to donate 1% of their salaries into sport for development programs. So it's embedding it right in their contract. And the goal is that this could be just embedded in the industry. And it's not just the right thing to do. It's like, this is building your sport. This is building your fan base. These are people that love to support you. Why don't we view this as a part of our model? And I'm hoping that all sports will head in that direction, where you see it as an ecosystem. It's not just, if you have $500, you can go to an NFL game. It began as a community event. Like, baseball was America's pastime, and now to go to Fenway Park, it's incredibly expensive. So I think sport, like I kind of said at the start, can both reflect society or it can influence it. And if you guys go into those industries, I hope you influence it, because right now it's reflecting a society that is very unequal, and sport is reflecting that too. And I think it's going to take a generation to change it, and I hope that it's this one.
Yeah, thank you. How important? How do you keep up with it? How do you keep up with it? And then your dream, it's still, or still have bigger.
So the question was, how do we keep people motivated? How do we keep the team motivated? And then also, what's the ultimate dream for soccer reporters? So keeping people motivated, I think, is getting, and this probably applies to any organization, is getting people into the right positions that they get to do what they care about doing. So it's a lot of aligning the stars. Like, what am I good at? Why am I here? And can you align that passion and those skills with the right position at the right time? So I know for me, my job's evolved from coaching, where that was what I wanted to be doing out there every day with the kids. And then I was training our coaches, and now there's more admin, so I'm now doing more fundraising and grant writing and partnerships. So roles evolve, and I think you keep people motivated by asking them, talking to them about what their goals are and trying to align the position as much as possible. That's not always possible, but I think if you're genuinely trying to do that, and people are bought into what the mission is, and they see it happening, they actually see it happening, that they'll stay. And I think one thing we've been talking a lot about this year is, a lot of people are trying to figure out, what can I do? Like, there's something going on in the world that they're concerned about, and they're like, how do I make a difference? And one thing we keep talking to our staff about is, you're already doing it. You're doing something. You're in the arena every day. Like that kid that you're working with, that parent that you talk to, that's doing the work. That is what the work looks like. And it may not be at the scale of, changing the world, but it's making a difference to a person. And I think that's what gets lost when we all try to do huge things. So that kind of gets at the dream. The dream is to never lose that. To never. We as an organization want to make as much change, as much positive change as we can, and add value as much as we can without losing sight of that every single person that we work with is a person that we want to, fully support. And I think there's a tension there, because people become statistics very quickly. So we want to add as much value as possible for as long as we can and have that be sustained. I think ideally we wouldn't need to work with refugees, because there would be no refugees. That would be the big dream.
Anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
Have you ever gone into the communities you go into and conducted an ethnography or something to really exemplify the importance of organizations like you?
We've done, we call it monitoring evaluation. I don't know specifically the ethnography that maybe you're referring to, but I guess we had researchers from the University of Illinois come in to specifically look at our international programs and how our American staff were relating, because we wanted to address this idea of sort of imperialism or exceptionalism, and they found that it was an authentic collaboration, that wasn't happening, that both sides genuinely wanted the same thing. So we've been able to do sort of piecemeal research like that at a university level. We just had a study done at our Oakland program around absenteeism and whether being a part of our program affects school achievement, and particularly absenteeism. We found that our kids were half as absent as their peers. So there's these sort of snippets, but data is challenging. You have to retain kids over time, retain coaches over time. We don't have ID cards that can collect everybody's data as you walk in. Maybe we should get that now. So yeah, we're definitely committed to it, and we've been able to do some piecemeal, but not in a sort of community level way. And I think that's the hope, is that we are able to create a program that is consistent enough over time that it warrants doing sort of a larger scale, does this program create long-term impact? So right now we're kind of looking at pieces of it, and we hope to string it all together.
Yeah,
We
awesome.
spent most of the day together.
Well, thank you all, and thank you, Mary, for coming out here today. She's been here since like 8:30 this morning, so she's been an absolute champ. So, is that a hand coming up? No. Okay. We'll be hanging out for a couple more minutes. If you all want to just come up and have a conversation with Mary about anything. Otherwise, thank you all for coming out here. Again, thank you to the Center for Students with Disabilities, SWB, Sport Management, and the list keeps growing longer each event, for being like exceptional partners, both with funding and also their experience in just helping us manage and create these events. And thank you all for helping continue to make it successful. So, thanks.
We'll also get links to one of the articles you were talking about, and we'll make sure followers